Welcome everybody to today's webinar, 2025, the year skills got serious. This is our final webinar for the year, and we're going to be taking a closer look, kind of recap on all the webinars we've done this year, centered around skills. We've got a great conversation planned. Before we do get started, I've got a couple of very quick housekeeping things to get through. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded. It is also being live streamed on LinkedIn. So if you can't make it to the end, or if you'd like to share it with one of your colleagues, you can do so by waiting till tomorrow when we send the recording link to you. So look out for an email from us, or if you sign up on LinkedIn, that will come into your email. Second of all, is an interactive session, so there will be some polls throughout the discussion. Strongly encourage you to get involved with those. We've got some questions centered around those. And last but not least, there is time for a Q&A session at the end of today's discussion. So if you've got any questions for us, fire them in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. For those of you who are joining on LinkedIn, you can use the comment sections there. I've got it open here on my second screen, so feel free to drop them there. Now that boring stuff's out of the way, I'm going to get started by introducing our first panelist. So Sam, can you give us a quick introduction about yourself, please?
Hi everyone, my name's Sam Taylor. I've worked in L&D for a good 20 years now, and I've worked for various global organisations such as Barclays, Tesco, HSBC and Hitachi, to name but a few. And in the past few years, I've been involved in some skills-based projects, as well as looking quite heavily towards the EdTech and learning tech arena.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to digging into that experience of yours. Charlotte, could you give us a quick intro about yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Charlotte Lloyd. I too have been in kind of HR, talent, recruitment, HR umbrella for the last 15 plus years. I've worked mainly in financial services and banking. And for the last couple of years, I've been at Rolls-Royce. So my former role as global head of future talent and skills has been all things skills-based org, strategic workforce planning, capability, all of the buzzwords you've heard on the market. And I've practiced what I've preached, and I've actually gone squiggly. And I'm now sitting in our defence business as a program manager for transformation.
Real life use case that I'm sure we're going to discuss today. And last but not least, Hazel, could you please just give us a few words about yourself, please?
Hello, yeah, I'm Hazel McGuinness. I have worked in financial services for over 20 years, jumped all over the place with a squiggly career before we knew that squiggly careers existed, doing ops, HR, and the majority of program management transformation roles. I recently left Lloyd's Banking Group, where I had led on the skills-based transformation that they have been through. So that is why I'm here to share that.
Yes, and I am very grateful for all three of you joining. I'm very excited to tap into your wealth of knowledge. Before we do that, though, I am going to launch the first of three polls, which should be appearing on your screen right now. The question is, which stage best describes your organization's current approach to skills? We're just starting to map skills. We have basic visibility, but it's inconsistent. We have good visibility, but acting on it is a challenge. We have a mature skill strategy in place, or unsure, here to learn. And I hope we have something for everybody in today's webinar. And yeah, I believe we've got a lot to get through to sort of cover all ends of the spectrum. And I know some more people probably joined throughout the intros there. So thanks very much if you're joining us. If you have cast a vote, because it's not quite every one of you, but I will end it now and share the results, which should be appearing on your screen right now. So the question was, which stage best describes your organization's current approach to skills? 23% of you voted we have good visibility, but acting on it is a challenge. The 38% of you voted we have basic visibility, but it's inconsistent. Then second highest was we have good visibility, but acting on it's a challenge. Some votes across the board, though. As I said, I do believe we're going to cover all ends of the spectrum here, so I'm excited to do that, which takes me to my first question for you, Charlotte. Basically, skills as the priority over another HR initiative. So what's the biggest change in 2025 that you've seen that basically moves skills away from being just another HR initiative?
I think there's a couple actually. I think it's definitely fair to say that skills are no longer just an HR initiative or a checkbox for learning. And I genuinely do think it's becoming that strategic lever that the business want it to be. But I think in short, organisations that are treating skills development as that ongoing integrated um, kind of process into their long-term strategy rather than that occasional tick box training are definitely better placed to adapt to kind of the biggest technological disruption that we're seeing, and of course shifting business models. Transformation is inevitable and a continuum. So I think those that are treating skills as part of that process are certainly going to come out on top. I think some of the biggest changes that I've seen is we know the labour market's transitioning from more of that degree qualification centred based approach to more capability. So matching people to roles based on what they know they can do rather than kind of their past experience and their qualifications. I think from an employee perspective, people want that lifelong learning. They want that adaptability. And I think businesses are looking definitely for a mix of that tech and those human skills. And I think that's definitely becoming more of kind of the currency for employability. I think we're all aware of the deepening skill shortages and those widening talent gaps. So we've got shrinking workforce, we've got an aging population. And I think we genuinely have outdated talent strategies and a real disconnect between development programs and kind of business challenges. So I think the majority of businesses that I've certainly spoken to are trying to kind of adapt their talent approaches to that. I think skills investment as a value proposition is a really interesting take on skills. So it's not just about filling roles and attracting people, it's about retaining that talent and growing it and offering those development opportunities to retain your talent. What else? We've got younger generation coming through who want growth opportunities, they want flexibility, they want continuous learning, all of that good stuff. So I guess those organizations that can offer that are going to stand out and be more competitive. I can't sit here and not mention tech. You know, we've got AI automation, we've got digital transformation, we've got roles that are requiring completely new or updated skills due to that tech change. We've got that shift from those fixed roles in those hierarchical structures to more of that fluid skills-based framework. Tasks are becoming automated, so reducing that demand for your traditional skills. So we've definitely seen that demand for that human skill coming through because, of course, there's skills that machines can't replicate. So creativity, critical thinking, all of that good stuff. And I guess finally, policy changes. So again, supporting the skills first mindset. We've got the European Commission who are pushing industries, government, education to kind of better align their skills, their training to the skills supply. And of course, we've got Skills England, which is kind of being pulled together to solve those regional shortages. So we've got talent, we've got generational changes, we've got tech changes, we've got policy input. So I think skills is definitely becoming kind of more of a matter of economic strategy and not just HR, for sure.
I had a couple of points to feedback on, and every time I wrote something down, you tackled it on the next point. So really well, really really well put there. I did make a note of though. It took us 8 minutes to mention AI, so that might be a new record, so to speak, for us. But yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, there, Charlotte. Sam, this next question here is for you. Is talking about organizational maturity, particularly when we talk about how they evaluate and measure skills. So, what developments have you observed this year when it comes to organizational maturity in how they measure and assess skills?
I think for me, a lot of it is back to our old friend technology. I think what we're beginning to see more, certainly started developing a lot more in 2024, is more of a democratization in the ability to be able to evaluate, measure, and track skills with the technology that's out there. Previously, it always used to be the preserve of sort of the big tools that you had to have at least, I don't know, 5,000 people in an organization before they'd even entertain talking to you. But what we're seeing is a lot more of the sort of technology being put in place to actually support smaller organizations and take away some of that pain, which is actually the tracking, the evaluation, the measuring of things and being able to pull that data back, particularly when we look back to sort of some of the answers from the poll, that sort of what do we do with this information is proving to be challenging. So I think from that perspective, there's easier access to things. You can argue that there's also beginning to be a little bit of a movement away from. So when I was first playing around with skills in sort of the HSBC time, when they were bringing in a skills strategy, they had a platform and they were measuring skills from a scale of 1 to 10. That was an entirely subjective measure. And also that entirely subjective measure would be moved, or sort of the assumption was it was connected to completion of a course. So I think what we're beginning to see is dumping of that subjective measure and beginning to look at things, other ways in which we could evaluate and track that. So there might be a degree of individual sort of self-measurement, but also there are other tools that we could look at. There might be things like observation, bringing in the things that aren't courses, so potentially the outputs of mentoring, the outputs of particular projects, and using that as sort of almost like an evidence portfolio of how your skills were growing and being applied inside of the environment. I think there's also, when you look at some of the literature that's out there at the moment, there's some bits around how people are beginning to use technology that tracks eye movements or stuff like that. I've got a bit of a concern around that, because that doesn't necessarily feel like it's going to be particularly inclusive if you're not neurotypical. So I think there's a sort of a watch point on some of the tools that are coming around and people are playing with. But I think for me, it's moving away from that self-evaluation and even manager evaluation, because sometimes that can be very much dependent on how well you get on with your manager as to whether or not they'll ratify your skills level.
100%.
Doesn't feel that objective. And then sort of just coming up, I think, from a design perspective, for us as sort of either a learning function or a talent function, coming up with different ways in which we would see those skills being demonstrated. And I think that links back to this notion of not just thinking about skills, but thinking about skills and tasks. And sort of the evidence of that skill in practice is through the sort of demonstration of a series of tasks and thinking about that, but not at too micro a level.
Yeah, completely agree. I think, speaking from personal experience, I'm in marketing, been writing about skills and this transition for quite a few years now, but that's something that I think's really become more prevalent. I feel like this year, maybe towards the end of last year, this connection, but so the disconnect between a skill and a task, because at the end of the day, like, people are working to deliver something, right? And like there's sometimes this differentiation between skills and tasks is something that I think more and more organizations are trying to connect the skill directly with the task, rather than to say, oh, I know Excel, great, but does that mean you can do this thing that we need, for this project, right? So yeah. Okay, moving on. Thank you very much, Sam. Hazel, I know you've been sitting there patiently, so this next question here is for you. So question here is, what has 2025 revealed about the organizational conditions needed for skills-based transformation to succeed?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple of things, and I would say the two fundamentally important things are strategic alignment. So throughout the organization or area of the organization that it's being looked at, that everything, the whole colleague journey, is linked up in relation to skills. It can't be a side of desk thing that, you look at, oh, we're going to start doing skills-based recruitment, because that won't work if there is nothing else in relation to skills that exists. The other thing that is really important is leadership support. We all know that, if you're doing a new thing and, it's seen as a buzzword, or there's a new initiative, that whichever area of the business it's coming from, you're pushing uphill unless you have full leadership support and you have a clear maturity model around where you think this might take you. From experience, the area of the business that we looked at first was the tech area. So chief operating office, all of the tech in their pretty self-contained area of the business. Let's pilot everything in there first. And that makes it easier to line everything up. You can be really clear about what are the things around the organisation and delivering something that do trip you up. What do you need to have in place? And doing that in a piloting way, albeit across, for Lloyd's, that's, thousands and thousands of people.
Big pilot.
It's still a big pilot, but a pilot nonetheless. It allows you to realise, right, okay, what do we actually need to have in place logistically and foundationally to then scale this even wider? What are the other things that we need to do? Adaptability as well, and Sam and Charlotte mentioned as well, we all know skills are changing. The half-life of a skill now is famously 5 years. If you take tech, it's probably less than 2 now, but 2.5 as a standard. It's changing all the time. Do you have the things in place? What's your governance structure to be able to make changes and to adapt to new skills that are coming up? How do you look at keeping your catalogue of skills relevant? It's not, and also understanding what are the skills that are needed and where. All of these are the things that happen as you move forward in a skills-based organisation. So that would be the things that I would say.
Yep. Very well put. You mentioned the half-life of skills, the 2.5 years. I think our CEO would disagree. He just published an article. He's a tech guy, just for the record, but he wrote an article recently. It's on our blog about since AI has come about, this is going even faster. So, for example, prompt engineering was the buzzword, the in thing in January this year, and in 6 months, it's shifted towards this MCP movement, which is basically just mean everything that you learned about prompt engineering is kind of out the window, and this is where we're at right now, and it's telling obviously that how quickly these things are. How quickly they're moving. So very, very, very interesting stuff. And thank you all of you for your responses. We do have another question here before we jump into our second poll. I'm just going to read it out here because it's quite a good one. As skills visibility improved, this for you, Charlotte, by the way. As skills visibility improved in 2025, what practical challenges did organizational leaders face when turning that data into meaningful development actions?
I think 2025 overall, organizations finally had data. I think that's pretty fair to say. There was lots of data on skills, but I think the biggest observation for me is that companies lacked the governance, clarity of priorities. I think there's a big piece around manager capability and helping managers and leaders in the business understand the shift to skills and what that means in terms of having those development and performance conversations. I think processes absolutely haven't been defined. I think they've been built as you've gone along, and then you've got kind of op models. You've got lots of kind of skills type roles being recruited for, but depending on which company you work for, they sit in lots of different departments. So I think there's the idea of we really need to get our house in order before we start really looking at skills. Skills data is, like I said, in abundance. It's inconsistent, it's messy, and I think leaders really struggle to turn that data into really reliable insights for, whether it's hiring, strategic workforce planning, development. I think if they were asked a question, what are your critical skills and what's your plan for developing them, I think a lot of people would struggle. And Justin, you just mentioned it. I think technology massively outpaced the maturity of skills models. So a lot of people probably on the call will have bought talent marketplaces, skills inference engines, all of the stuff that you can lift and shift off the shelf. But it was almost the tools are too powerful and people didn't really know how to use them. So it's like having a Ferrari on a dirt road. You've got the capability to do it, but you're just not sure how to use it yet. So I think that for me is kind of the overarching observation of where leaders have potentially struggled with it, I think.
Yeah. What's your thought to say? So actually, it comes back to the poll at the beginning that we had as well. This kind of visibility is there, but connecting the dots. What's your thoughts on this point?
Yeah, I agree with everything that that Charlotte said. I think that, you know, sometimes it's the leadership capability, but also the leadership understanding of what do they need to do with the information? What is the driving force? You know, is it development? Is it workforce planning? Is it understanding the gaps in order to create your build, buy, borrow, you know, model? And it could be all three of those things. But what are the priorities? As you said, there's so much data available. You can cut it however you like. But what is the useful elements for the business? What are the priorities for the business? And looking at those first and being really clear. And you know, one of the things, if you're in a large organization where there's potentially even more data, which makes it more confusing, you know, what are the priorities for each different area? Because they could be different. You might have a skills gap somewhere, but what you may need somewhere else is something entirely different. So I think it's that back to the strategic alignment and the priorities around what do we actually want to do with the data before we look at it.
Yeah. Reverse engineer it. I think the other point on this is data silos as well, because it's all well and good, you know, as Charlotte mentioned, purchasing something, using a particular tool, using a particular data set, but then your processes are kind of living over here. And if these two things are living in complete isolation, then it's a waste of money, it's a waste of time. How do they interact? Exactly. Yeah. But first and foremost, as you said, you know, what do we want to get from it before you even make the decision to start doing these things? So, yeah, thanks very much for those responses there. I am going to launch the second poll of our 3 polls today. I believe, panelists, you can vote as well. This is talking about growth pathways challenges. So, what's the biggest challenge your organization faces in creating growth pathways for employees? We don't have consistent visibility into employees' skills. Career pathways aren't clearly defined. Managers struggle to guide development conversations. Employees aren't sure what skills they need to progress. Internal mobility processes are unclear or slow. We haven't prioritized structured pathways yet, or simply unsure. Or need to learn. And I can see already there is a very mixed bag of responses so far. So this is going to be an interesting result. And it's exactly, a few more voting. That's good. So it's not quite all of you, so I'll let it run for a few more seconds. And then I will share the results. Okay, I think that's it from everybody. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results, which should be visible on your screen now. So what's the biggest challenge your organization faces in creating growth pathways for employees? 31% of you voted for career pathways aren't clearly defined. We got split for 15% between we don't have consistent visibility into employees' skills, managers struggle to guide development conversations, and internal mobility processes are unclear. Some votes for the others, actually literally every other one. I think the poll in itself, just the responses there, I think is telling enough. I guess we talked a little bit about this before we went live, Sam, about sort of shifting employee expectations and the change here. So the question here is: employees increasingly expect clarity on career growth pathways. How did this shift influence how organizations approach learning, development, and internal mobility this year?
This is an interesting one because there's part of me that wants to almost, some of it is going to be entirely contextual. If you have got a very, let's say, engineering type focused organization, there's potentially a very clear pathway. But potentially for more white collar organizations, this concept of a squiggly career that both Hazel and Charlotte referred to at the beginning of the session kind of says, we don't need them anymore. And actually, why should the business tell you as an individual where you want your career to go? For you as an individual, it's about you deciding what the skills I've got, what are the skills that I enjoy using, and then, again, leveraging our old friend technology, if it's possible within the organization, saying, well, what roles exist inside the business that will help so that I can use these skills in, and then potentially finding a career pathway that way. So for me, I think there almost needs to be an expectation setting back with the individuals, the employees, saying, we're not going to tell you which way your career can go in the same way that we might have done historically. It's your life. You need to make the path in the way in which you want. And as a result, that can make things interesting from a development perspective, because what do we then create? But I think that then goes into this notion of, we as learning professionals should be designing learning experiences. So actually, we're looking for other ways in which you can build and demonstrate those skills to get you into those environments, be it projects, stretch assignments, those kind of things, and beginning to document those as potential things that people could be doing. Again, this leads back into a couple of things. Manager capability. Do our managers have the ability to actually have that coaching conversation with those individuals and try and get them to that point, to identify how could you even invent your own stretch assignment that would get you there? Who could you talk to in the organisation? And then I think the other bit that's sort of always lurking in the background, which is, have we as an organisation got a consistent way in which we refer to the skills inside of our job? So that kind of links into your talent piece, be it recruitment or mobility from the organisational perspective. Can we move people? Can managers articulate what a skill is, first of all, and can they articulate the skills that are really needed in that role? And that's something that managers still really, really struggle with. And I think it's what both Hazel and Charlotte were referring to earlier when we were talking about manager capability in this. So I think it's if we haven't got a really defined dictionary of what skills go into a particular job, then if you are trying as an individual to map yourself to that ideal career next step for you, it's not going to work, because you're not going to find the things that are really the right fit for you, and you're going to end up being in a finance job when actually you realize that you really hate finance, and actually what you're interested in is data analysis, and you could be in a different team instead.
Yeah, you took it a different way than I was expecting, so I'm really grateful. Charlotte, agree, disagree? What are your thoughts on this one?
I completely agree. I think, I guess to add to the conversation, I think we need to challenge our typical hierarchical structures. If we're looking at skills-based org, we should be looking at how, skills to tasks and that fluidity around the system. Whereas you look in, everyone has their preferred work system of choice, and you'll click on someone's name and all of a sudden a nice little chart will appear, and you look upwards when you think of your career. So I think, to Sam's point, I think careers are defined in the traditional sense because you look up and you either become a manager or you become an SME. And a lot of people have become managers when they maybe shouldn't have or didn't really want to, but it was their only choice. So I think absolutely people should be empowered now to start thinking about, if I don't want to look up and I don't want to be a manager in SME, how is the business helping me become squiggly? So that's through things like, it's the basics, really. It's just being completely transparent and everyone having that line of sight of opportunities in the business. I think learning should be personalized. So we've done a lot personally at Rolls-Royce around how can we make all of our opportunities really transparent? How can we personalize people's learning experiences so they can almost tailor their own learning to where they want their career to go? But I think finally, when we think about tech, I think tech should pull all of these kind of bolt-ons, whether it be development, learning, performance, jobs, mentors. I think you need to pull that all into one place and use AI to link all of that together. So I put my skills in the system. That tells the business I have skills in X. I tell the system I want to develop in X skills, and the AI then kicks the right learning, mentors, gigs, jobs, whatever my way. And I think, so it's absolutely empowering the employees, but giving them the tools to do that and the transparency to navigate it themselves.
Yep. Well put in, and thank you very much, Sam and Charlotte, for those responses. You keep taking my points I was going to make, so I'm going to move on. The managers not wanting to become managers. You did it again to me. But yeah, thanks very much for those responses there. Shifting gears a little bit, coming back, I guess, to the topic of skills assessment standards, but digging a little bit deeper. So, Hayes, I want to ask this next question for you. So, which approaches proved most effective for ensuring consistent and credible skills assessments across teams?
So probably a slightly controversial answer here, but I'm not sure we've cracked it. I'm not convinced that there is one way of being consistent and credible in terms of skills assessments. The most standard view is a self-assessment, which is fine and is credible to an extent. You can then have your line manager review. They either agree or disagree, and you would hope there would be a conversation around where there's a different view on that assessment. One thing that we also tried was a peer review in terms of skills assessment, particularly in relation to more technological roles where the line manager may not be the best guide in terms of whether somebody's coding ability was, particularly, what level it's at. So peer review is a useful piece. Can't be just one peer though, because then, Hazel
Might not
chooses
like that
Charlotte.
person.
Charlotte agrees with what Hazel says. So we went with five peers, but that is, it's a monumental task to roll that kind of thing out. And obviously it's not going to be right for every organisation either, or for every role. I think the other things to think about is the actual assessment framework itself as well. How complicated is it? Equally, how simple is it? One person's proficient is another person's expert. And how do those marry up? And what are the learning solutions off the back of those? Because as you go up a scale of skills ability, you get to a point where the learning looks very, very different. The learning is going to be more experiential, learning, doing webinars, doing TED Talks, speaking to other individuals, providing your coding on open source or other pieces like that. This is all what tailors the outputs on the back of those assessments. So there are, of course, obviously the other standard approaches, which is actual testing. Again, not appropriate for every skill, but very appropriate for some, and can't really be argued with if it's a coding language, for instance. But yeah, in short, I don't think we've cracked it. I don't think that there is one way that answers everything.
Yeah, I want to bring this back to you, Charlotte. I just wanted to add something quickly before that. I do agree. I think it's unique to every organization. And I also, speaking from experience from our platform, basically what we do, we do this balancing that you talked about. So in our system, there's 5 methods to assess a skill. The self and manager, which are the obvious ones, peer. To your point about tech expert, so the line manager isn't necessarily the person who's, someone who's managing the entire dev team, for example. That person might be skilled in Java, but you're trying to assess someone's skills in the cloud, and they would just, okay, they're a little bit closer. Than a better example would be AI or whatever, right? So you have this expert, and then the last piece is this test assessment. So we have our assessment tool as well, which does it. And I think that's it's as you said, not cracked, but I think the best way is to try to strike that balance and sort of aggregate it, because relying on one thing over the other is not going to be too accurate. But Charlotte, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add on this point as well.
All of the above, completely agree with. I think what I've noticed is that rightly or wrongly, I think people have anchored themselves to that competency model. And it gives very clear definitions of, if I've been in a role 10 plus years, I'm an expert. And I think people have anchored to the competency model. And where I've seen people possibly fall short is where they almost just replace the word competency with capability and expect there to be then a change in attitude of how we assess. So I guess in the last role that I was in, I saw it as an opportunity to kind of go, well, everyone in the business sort of has different levels of competency. Some have 1 to 5, some have 1 to 10, some have 1 to 3. So actually, we saw it as an exercise to go, let's strip out all of our competency models and go with one for everybody, whether you're tech or non-tech. And rather than kind of the 1, 2, 3, 4 being structured around qualifications you've got, tenure, years in role, all of that good stuff, we then measured it around impact in role.
Mm-hmm.
So you then got the younger generation coming through, not feeling like they've got to sit in one role for 10 years in order to be classed as an expert. They've got to prove their kind of impact in role, which could be after 2 years, for example, through all of the evidence you've all, Hazel's talked through and you've talked through, peer feedback. But how do you build up your evidence portfolio to show your impact? And that's how you kind of climb the ranks over kind of sitting in a role for a period of time.
Yep. Very interesting. I'm taking a note for myself because I think that's something that we could introduce potentially. So yeah, thanks for that, and thank you, Hazel, for that response there. Shifting gears towards internal mobility, I'm going to bring it back to you, Hazel. But question here is, what have been some of the main blockers to internal mobility that you've observed, and how did the successful ones overcome them?
I think time and resource is the main blocker that I've observed for internal mobility. I think this was a problem long before skills came along. I think an understanding, an organisational-wide understanding of skills related to roles. So there are these 5 skills that are required for a call centre employee at XYZ proficiency level. That colleague can see that 4 of those skills are required in an audit role at a similar or just above proficiency level. They then access the learning that's available within the various different academies and pathways that are made to evidence that they've upskilled themselves in those areas. And they apply for a role and are able to talk through all of the learning that they've done in relation to the skills that is all outlined within the job architecture. As a vision for a colleague, what that does is knocks down all those organisational boundaries and as Charlotte mentioned earlier, the upwards look of I'm in the call centre, therefore the next role is supervisor. They can see how their role relates elsewhere. The problem that we have with that, and that skills has helped enormously, where you have that job architecture and that end-to-end view, but it's still that line manager and the culture of are they willing to take a chance on somebody who has come from an entirely different area? Do they trust the skills enough? And I think that is the biggest blocker for me still at the moment. As I said there, skills has helped enormously where you have the foundations because the skills are visible to everybody. The learning's available to everybody. You can demonstrate how you're upskilling yourself to close those gaps. But there is the cultural resistance or just lack of trust. And then also I think there is the resource side of it as well. There was a huge piece of work done on reskilling in many different organisations, but in Lloyd's as well, and really, really successful, moving branch staff that were from closed branches, footfall decreasing, and reskilling them, measuring their propensity to learn a new skill and putting them through a reskilling programme to then put them into coding and engineering. It was a really successful programme of work. However, the amount of resource that is required to then intake those people, to buddy with them, it's a huge undertaking. So I think that those things, it's the culture and the resource of internal mobility that are the biggest blockers. But skills is definitely helping. More because it's empowering an individual, I think, it's the biggest thing.
Sure. Sam, what's your thoughts on internal mobility blockers?
I think largely the same. For me, it's that manager wanting somebody who's just like Freddie that's left. That's the biggest problem we have, be that internal or external recruitment. I think it's, I suppose, to Charlotte's point about the sort of the legacy inside of Rolls-Royce, was that you've got lots of different things. So again, there's that, is there a single consistency of language? So again, is a skill in customer service the same as a skill in, I don't know, sales, for example? And do they mean the same thing to the same level? And then I think, so yeah, and then I think the other thing is, there's kind of, sometimes with the software, there's potentially semantic analysis. Is there the intelligence to sort of extrapolate that if you've organised events, is that the same as project management? Can you see the connections between those and how those skills might be compatible? So I think they're the main things that strike me from sort of that.
Yeah. We didn't. Yeah. Thanks very much for that, Sam. We didn't really talk much about culture, which is something that we usually do. It just comes up naturally in these conversations. But I think, to both of your points, this culture and follow through, because you see organizations say, oh, we have a talent marketplace, and it's like really what it is just a bunch of job listings. There's no connection between how do I get from here to there. Like it's just this is our feigning attempt at actually doing internal mobility. So but that has to be a cultural leadership initiative that actually gets implemented and followed through. Quick reminder, actually, because we are nearing the end of our discussion, there is time for Q&A. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask our panelists, you can do that in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, on LinkedIn comments over there, which I can't see any right now. But if something pops up to you afterwards, you can fire them into us at hello@skillpanel.com. I'm also going to share all three of our panelists' information in this email tomorrow with the recording. So if you have anything you would like to ask them directly, you can do that there as well. However, we are at the time of our third and final poll, and I think it might be time to dig deeper into AI. It's we're 2/3 of the way through. So the question here is about AI skills data friction. So when using AI skills data, where do you experience the most friction? Turning insights into clear development actions, connecting skill growth to business outcomes, getting leadership buy-in, data quality or completeness. We're not using AI-driven skills intelligence yet, or unsure. I guess we've kind of hovered around the topic of AI, even what you just mentioned at the end there, Sam. So might be about time we dig into it a bit further. And I can see seems to be the same number as last time. So I guess a few people are just listening in and not paying too much attention. So that's okay. But I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Share the results, which should be visible on your screen now. When using AI skills data, where do you experience the most friction? 46% of you voted overwhelmingly. We're not using AI-driven skills intelligence yet. 31% of you voted for connecting skill growth to business outcomes, where we got basically votes for everything except getting leadership buy-in. So we got some good leaders out there. So I'm going to stop sharing and close that poll there. And we're going to obviously unpack this a little bit further. Charlotte, so the question here is, what are some practical strategies or tips for using AI to make better decisions about skills development, internal mobility, and workforce planning?
I think the poll's just kind of described it nicely, that people either aren't using it or they've got it and don't know how to link it to kind of a business strategic outcome. So I think it's really basic. It start with the business problem, not the tech. There is so much tech out there and it's really, really expensive. And a lot of people potentially have dabbled in tech and they've, wasted a lot of time and spent a lot of money doing it. So what is the business problem that you're trying to inform? I think Hazel mentioned this earlier. And it may not be one business problem for the whole business. It could be a business problem per function. So don't always assume that it's the same business problem that you're solving for. So it could be, you know, what teams need development investment next year, or what roles are at highest risk of automation. So like really understand what question you're trying to answer. I would say for those that have AI, really lean into it. I would say if you can use AI to link, I think I've said this before, learning, performance, skills data, recruitment, talent, link all of those kind of employee experience buckets together so that they can have personalized kind of development opportunities and recommendations, and they can take ownership of their career. But on the flip side, then the business have full visibility of what an insight into what its employees are interested in and actively pursuing. So you then get kind of interesting engagement data from that as well. Maybe a bit controversial, but I guess managers no longer really need to interpret skills data. AI can kind of translate it for you into business decisions. It just then needs like a human lens to go, that seems sensible. So I think a lot of time sometimes is spent on trying to interpret data yourselves, when we have got some really clever AI that can do that. And then in terms of like practical help, I think, again, coming from a leadership perspective, embed skills, data and AI into like your annual planning cycles and your investment cycles, whatever that looks like. So when you're looking at what do we build, buy, borrow, bot, kind of use AI to scenario plan for the future, look at automation impact, look at new emerging roles rather than your traditional, 12-month resource cycle. So really lean into that. Focus on critical skills. You can try and do everything to everyone all at once and you'll spend a lot of time not getting anywhere. So what are your critical skills that you want to develop, and use AI to help you find alternative talent paths. Break down barriers to internal mobility, because AI will give you loads of recommendations of how you can find talent and skills adjacencies of similar skills that could do that job. But unless you've broken down those barriers of movement, you're not really going to get anywhere.
Sure. Sam, what's your thoughts? Obviously, we got overwhelming majority voted here. We're not using our skills intelligence yet. Maybe from your perspective to sort of what do you think is sort of behind that decision making?
There's probably a couple of things. So one is cost, as Charlotte referred to. I think on the flip side of that, what you are beginning to see, and what I've also played with, is if you're just starting in the journey, you can use ChatGPT effectively, or Copilot, to strip your current job description, say turn this into a series of skills, and again to Charlotte's point, to then say, okay, from all these job descriptions, give me the top 10 league table of skills for the organization. And some of them will even go down to, if I'm in this kind of role, what are the proficiency levels? There's caveats to that, which again goes back into this broader, what is the overall organizational strategy, which is in some ways the concept of a job description is becoming a bit antiquated, and also pigeonholes people into particular sort of points. So I think the other main thing for me is around critical thinking. With any analysis that you'll get back from AI, I would be all over it like a rash in terms of, is there any gender bias coming through on that? Or any sort of neurodiversity, sort of anything that's sort of not your neurotypical bias that could be creeping through, because we've seen it a lot inside of, even in job advertisements. I remember in one organisation we're doing skills-based hiring, and I was pushing back because a lot of the language to bring in new coders was heavily coded towards male coders, and sort of actively potentially preventing women from wanting to apply for those particular roles. So I think there's that bit. And then I suppose the other bit, building on what Charlotte was saying, is one of the things I'm particularly interested in is almost, I live in hope for the death of the LMS. But I think, how could we leverage agentic sort of AI, sort of the chat agents, to Charlotte's point, to bring in that personalized learning pathway that means you don't have to log into another system to get your ideal paths. It will actually make suggestions for you based on what you're interested in, based on natural language processing, rather than having to guess how we've coded something inside the LMS.
Yeah, thank you very much for all of the responses there. I do have one final question before, which currently doesn't have any questions in the Q&A, but that's completely fine. We'll just end a little bit early. I'm going to go through each one of you one by one. I think I might actually start with you, Sam, this time. So, question here is: if 2025 was indeed the year skills became serious, what do you expect for the skills-based organization in 2026?
Um, I think I think we've still got a long way to go before skills do become serious in a lot of organisations. There are organisations out there that have been doing this for 20 years that are finally beginning to get to where they need to be. There are other companies that have started it, a lot of financial services companies, in the last sort of 5, 6 years that are still on that journey. And then because of this democratization through technology and sort of new tools coming to the marketplace, as well as what ChatGPT can do on the cheap, you're seeing more organizations begin to step out on this journey. So if I was wandering around learning technologies in London next year, I would still expect the main buzzword to be around skills.
Hmm.
I think it's still around the proof of the pudding being in the eating. So we still, a lot of us will want to go down this journey, but we'll still be struggling to get those dots joined from sort of business plus all the employee touch points perspective. So I think it's trying to consolidate something that is going to be moving at a ridiculous pace. I think that's the biggest challenge that we know from the technology skills we discussed earlier, they're just changing in sort of a blink of an eye. But
Hmm.
even the other ones, the speed at which learning functions potentially have taken to roll out some of these programs historically around skills or competencies or capability frameworks is too slow for this world. So I think it's how can we increase that time to execution and even taking a more agile approach to sort of run this as proof of concepts in our organization. So maybe that's the challenge for 2026. How can you don't have to eat the entire elephant, you can just start small.
Sure. Sure. Charlotte, what about you? What do you think about the skills-based organization in 2026 greatest challenge?
I think 2026 will be answering like the so what. I think 2025 is like the year we saw skills, we had lots of data, taxonomies, all of that good stuff. But I think 2026 is the year that we'll start to use skills and use that data to create the value that we're all hoping it will create. So I think 2026, if people really are driving towards a skills powered organization, it's a new business language and skills become that strategic currency that then links the whole ecosystem together. That would be the nirvana, I think, for 2026.
Short and sweet. Thank you. Hazel, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, it's similar, really, in terms of what I hope to see, is I hope there will be a greater awareness in employees of their skills and how that relates to roles,
Hmm.
and more empowerment around how they view their career and the horizons that can open and the different directions that it can go in. I hope to see a greater level of trust from organisations who are already on the skills journey, that a greater level of trust from colleagues and line managers around the process and trusting in the skills, to accept bulk recruitment, for instance, that they've not been involved in. They've been
Hmm.
involved in the skills side of that, assessing that recruitment. That sort of, taking that leap on that new person, taking that leap on that talent acquisition, talent move because of skills. And I think as the final thing is, and we touched on it right at the start, the entwinement of task and skill, and just
Yep.
seeing that start to separate out and people
Mm.
start to understand what is a task versus what is a skill. That's what
Yep.
I hope to see. But I think that this, I completely agree with Sam. I think that skills will still be the buzzword next year. I think that organisations are at very different places in the journey, so it will continue.
Yeah, time will tell. We'll have to do this again next December 2026. The year's skills got even more serious. So we can do another webinar at the end of next year with the four of us. As there are no questions in the Q&A, that's completely fine. As I mentioned, if you do have questions for either for myself or our panelists, you can fire them into hello@skillpanel.com. As I mentioned, this webinar has been recorded, so it's going to arrive in your inbox tomorrow, along with the details of our three panelists. Who I'd like to take a moment now to say a big thank you to you, Sam, Charlotte, and Hazel, for your insights shared. It was a really great discussion, and thank you all of you for joining, both on Zoom and on LinkedIn. And yeah, wishing everybody a happy holiday season. So this is our last webinar for the year. Something's come in. It's probably just just a thank you message. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody, and have a great rest of the day. Take care. Bye, guys.